Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Renaissance Room podcast. And in today's episode, I just wanted to come on really quick as someone who has experience in life, right? And I want to kind of talk about marriage, right, and relationships, because I know there's a lot of talk around here about it. And I know that, you're probably like, Jalen, please, but this is not necessarily touching on, I'm sorry, not even necessarily. I'm not hitting on anything about gender wars. I'm not hitting on any of that. I just want to come on here and say something to you guys that's pretty general, but I think it can help a lot of people. First and foremost, I think we live in a culture where everybody gets a platform, everybody gets an opinion, everybody gets a say so. And sometimes people who just have the equipment, they have the right quality video, right? Like they are allotted the opportunity to kind of speak to people, right? And even if they don't have the wisdom. I think one of the things about like Christianity and being a believer is that you have a lot of people who don't necessarily know how to apply the wisdom. And I think much of that takes time, but time is not a thing. Like time will pass you by if you're passive, but I think there's really something in experience. I think there's something about the wisdom of experience, right? We have this thing where we're like, we can pray for wisdom, we can pray for these things, but it's like, but you got to live though. You know what I mean? Like you got to live in order to have experience, in order to have wisdom. And so you have a lot of people today, especially when you talk about the church, who just don't have wisdom. I'm sorry. They don't have wisdom. I've sat in front of pastors who really just don't have wisdom. They, maybe they've lived a narrow life, right? I don't know what the case may be. I think oftentimes in Christianity, there's really this black or white thinking, right? It's like you're either all good, you went to the church, or you grew up in the church, you went straight through, now you're a pastor, or you're either all bad. You don't come from the church, but you come now you're coming into the church, you're a pastor and you're corrupt and you're stealing the money. And, we always like Christianity really kind of premises on this fundamental thinking of good and bad, right? Good and evil. And obviously there's a little bit of nuance and layers to that. But I think at the end of the day, much of this is kind of rooted in, I don't want to say rudimentary, because I just think that word would be a little bit of inappropriate. But I got to say, I think that there is a level of immaturity that really is very prevalent within Christian circles and within Christian communities, right? You have a lot of people who just don't have experience, right? And I don't know how much of that, growing up in the church, like I don't know how much of that is kind of like a disadvantage. As much as you want your kids to be connected to God and you want them to be connected to the faith and you want to teach them the way to go, I don't know where we are, but we've kind of reached this point in society where I think you have a lot of people who are afraid to live. And I think that's also why you kind of see the rise in Christian podcasters and influencers, because now it's kind of like their time to shine, right? Like they're speaking to a bunch of generations of people, young people, right, who are also afraid to live. You have a bunch of parents who won't even let their kids go to the movies. You know what I mean? And I'm not here to mock anybody. Like I understand the world can be a scary place, right? We've seen it. We've seen some very horrendous things take place. But at the same time, there's really something about having the story to say or being able to testify and say, God chose me, right? What does that look like? God chose me because I didn't get here by myself. You know what I mean? Like I did not grow up in the church, right? There were seeds that were planted in my life, but that was not, and I think for me, I think it's so spiritual. And I think my relationship with God is so spiritual and it's so very much alive and real. You know what I mean? It's all about the love. It's all about like who you are as a person. I knew as a little girl, I was different. I was different because I just felt like very strong inclinations about right and wrong, and I was very loving as a kid and I was very kind. And I just realized that the world was kind of cruel. And that's not to say I was perfect, but it's just to say that I knew something was different about me, and I just think, as I gotten older and I've started to understand myself and the word and life a little bit better, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm a child of God, but for so many people, it's like, what does that mean to you? You know what I mean? And so I don't want to go too deep here because, for me personally, my faith is such a personal thing. I talked to you guys about this. I wrote about it on Medium last year. I said, hey, listen, what happens when you start to market your faith? Right. You should never. I don't think you should market it. I've even questioned the idea of like being a disciple. Like, what does that look like? You know what I mean? Should everybody be a teacher? I don't think so. So anyway, I wanted to kind of talk to you guys about marriage, in terms of like Christianity, in terms of like religion and relationships and things like that. I think as much as it can be spiritual, as much as it's like we're waiting on God to bring our persons, as much as we, have to fight the spiritual warfare and all these things, y'all, I'm going to be honest with you, child, marriage is one of those things to where you have to want to be here. Right? Like, do you want to show up to this job every day? Do you want to be here to get the promotions and to work to better yourself and to get the raises and to like, do you want to move up in the company? It's as simple as that. And for a lot of people, the answer is no, right? For some people, it's like, hey, I'm here to, I want to learn something and then I want to move on to the next thing, or I want to build the next thing. I want this to be a stepping stone, or hey, I'm stepping into this company. I kind of want to try it out, but I'm not really here to grow with the company. I don't plan on investing, years in the company. I don't care to get the promotions, right? I'm here to pay my car note. You see what I'm saying? And so I think that lately there's been too much spiritualization of that. And I think there's been too much spiritualization in being single. I'm going to be honest with you. I think there's a lot of nuance when you start talking about singleness. So I don't want to preface solely on any one specific thing, but I can honestly say you have a lot of people who just don't have experience like with dating. And that's okay because I was that person. You know what I mean? But when you grow to have more experience, you grow to learn yourself, have an understanding about yourself, man, you realize much of life is just ordinary. Like, yeah, he might got a little bit of money, but he ain't balling out of control. Like most Black people aren't, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, she got this going on, but she ain't gonna have this on the back end too. She ain't gonna have all that going on. Like you just kind of start to realize that like much of life is just ordinary, y'all. Like, I don't know where we've gotten. I think when you talk about Christianity in terms of like over-spiritualization, you have a lot of people who just, I don't think the word is romanticized. I think it's over-spiritualization. It's like this Ruth and Boaz story and it's like we have just got to this point where it's like the fantasy is a thing that keeps people so far removed from reality. It's as simple as saying, hey, do you want to be with this person? Okay, what do you value? Do you value family? Okay, you gonna work it out. You know what I mean? You're going to, and then the other thing I would say too is like, I realize, and hey, you say, call it what you will, but religion does not inherently make somebody good, right? Granted, I understand from a psychological perspective, some people have just been born and they've had trauma and experiences that have altered the way they see the world, the way they treat other people. But at the end of the day, me personally, I'm not going to justify all of that. Like I'm at a point in my life where I do seek understanding, but I also don't really care to sit and go down somebody's history on why they are pretty much just a crappy person. You know what I mean? Like you are who you are at the end of the day. And I think we have to be honest about the dispositions in which we're born with, right? Like your personality is pretty much fixed. It's who you are. You can't change it, right? I've always been a very sensitive, very kind, very loving kid. You know what I mean? I've always been very bright. I've always been very expressive. Like, that's just me. Some kids are a little bit more reserved. Some kids are a little bit more and it's like, yes, I think your experiences can shape you. But I also think, if we are talking from a spiritual perspective, I think that that's just kind of how God made you to be, and I say that to say there are some people who just are not, inherently loving people, y'all. There are some people who are just not forgiving people. There are some people who are just mean people. There are some people who are just genuinely selfish. And I think we have to get to a certain point where it's like, we always talk about God being a redeemer. And it's like, I do believe that God can redeem people. But at the end of the day, honey, faith without works is dead. You have all these people talking like, oh, God is a redeemer. God can do this. But what are you doing to get there, though? You see what I'm saying? Like, what are you doing to get there? If you're just sitting around doing the same thing that you're like, so much of the sanctification process, so much of the purification comes from yielding, comes from doing what you don't really want to do. Maybe doing something you've never done before. You know what I mean? It comes from experience, it is really as simple as that. And I think that that's probably one of the downsides I would say with Christianity is that we have this ancient text, you know what I mean? And we have all these parables, but nobody really knows how to translate it to practical, application today. There's a lot of wisdom in the text, but nobody knows how to apply it. So you have a bunch of people who are just sitting around in their own little bubbles. They're inexperienced and they're kind of blaming the world, or they're thinking that the world is an unsafe place, and I'm not saying that it's not, but if you rocking with God, you're like, hey, listen, I'm safe. I'm safe here. I'm all right. God got me, and so again, I don't want to be insensitive. I'm not here to make a mockery out of anybody, but I just think something that I just find to be so common with a lot of Christian, a lot of people in the Christian space is like you have a bunch of people who genuinely are just inexperienced. And the thing about time is that time is constantly passing, right? And so now you're kind of like passively waiting, and now you're trying to justify, being in a state of perpetual singleness, which I personally just don't think is fundamentally or healthy for anybody. And I'm just being real with you. That's not to say that you need to go get married but to be honest, can I be honest? Like, I don't think that we were made to be perpetually single. You have a lot of people who are single for really no reason, and I'm not here to be naive to the dating scene, naive to the factors that play. But I'm telling you right now, you have information overload, right? Much of life is just ordinary, y'all. It's ordinary. Like, that's just what it is, and you have a bunch of people who now have platforms who have no experience. You got people who've been married for 30 years, and that's a beautiful thing. But they're coming on here talking to you about dating. How are you going to talk to us about dating when you've been dating? You did dating until '08. You were in high school. You don't have any dating experience. God bless you. Your marriage is beautiful. I'm glad hey, listen, you're sticking it out. But you're talking about people who who were wed during a completely different time within our culture. And I'm not here to disqualify them. They have experience, right? That's valid. But again, applicable wisdom, right? Where does this go? Where can you, I don't know. And then you have a lot of people who are really dishonest, right? Like, I don't know, y'all. Anyway, I don't think that most people who are single today, I just don't think that they should be perpetually single. I don't think that that's God. I mean, I know y'all going to say what y'all want to say. And I know if you're single, you just kind of got to make peace with it. But I just personally don't think that that's God's will for us. And I do think to an extent, how we think about things, how we view the world, all of this has a huge impact on what shows up in your life. You know what I mean? Like, if you are somebody who you have this very negative perspective, you have this very fearful perspective, you don't have any experience in vetting and choosing partners, like, your mindset is going to be screwed, right? And when you start talking about people who do kind of live life in a very narrow way, it's not to say that you have to go against your standards. No, it's about self-control, self-respect, and what works for you, right? But I can honestly say, when you don't have that experience, when you don't know yourself, and now here you are in your 30s and 40s, like, that's incredibly difficult. That's incredibly difficult. Like, you're going to find yourself in many unfulfilled spaces, and it's not because there's something necessarily wrong with the world per se. It's just that you're not really equipped for it. You know what I mean? And I know that sounds like such a harsh thing, but I just had to come on here and say it, because I just think you have too many people who are on platforms and they're really just making generalizations, when it's like, if you really take the time to sit with the person and their, particular experience, it's like you can hear, well, this is very much like a one-off. You know what I mean? Like, their particular experience and their life and their, like, that is so narrow, right? And so I'm not saying that it's not hard, right, to date and to meet people and to find your person. But what I will say is that when you can put your feet on the ground, when your faith becomes a practice, when you can actually apply the wisdom in the Bible and actually be a doer of the word instead of just a hearer of the word or a teacher of the word, your life is going to change, period. And this is coming from somebody who at one point was reading a Bible text and I found myself lost in religion and trying to please people and going off of the external, like, versus somebody who really just started living it. A lot of people today are single because they have issues, and I'm not here to, like, I'm just providing you guys with the other side of the perspective, right? Because I hear what you're saying, right? I hear you, right? You got a lot of men and women, a lot of men entitled, you know what I mean? A lot of men ain't choosing because everybody choosing them. The numbers they're in disproportion, right? The numbers are the ratios, right, are disproportionate. I hear you. You got the cheating going on. You got the social media. Like, I hear you, but a lot of y'all got issues, and you don't, like, there's something, there, not this, obviously this is not for everybody. This is absolutely not for everybody. Like, some people are just mentally sane and they realize that other people have issues and they're like, I would never, and then some people have stuff to lose. You have children, you're like, things change. But again, I just personally, this is me personally, I just think that much of life is ordinary. It's not a matter of like romanticizing. I actually think marriage is very beautiful. I don't know why we downplay it. It's very beautiful. Like it's very much tea. It is. It really is. I think when people talk about being single, I think people over romanticize being single, especially today. People are like, yeah, like and it's just like, I just think the thing about life is like, if your life is like, it's not about stability, but it's just more so like, if nothing changes, nothing changes, And I think that's how I kind of view life and relationships. And that doesn't mean go put yourself in situations and get yourself in danger and get yourself bound up. But why does it always have to be that? Like when you think about it, most people have such a negative outlook on dating, even if they wrap it up in spiritual language, even if they're trying to give a testimony and like, even if they're trying to be like, it's really these undertones. And even still, when you meet some people who maybe, did grow from certain situations, and they are, confident in things like, they are aware of where they went wrong in their relationships and, stuff like that. It's like, yeah, but you hear the insecurity, you hear the fear, and you also understand the weight of it. So I think much of it is like to each his own, independent choices. But I just got to be honest with you. I just think it's just a little bit of like imbalance, with some of that. Like I said, it's faith and works. I think a lot of people really do have issues that absolutely play into their inability to connect and relate to others. And I just don't think we talk about that enough, and you have to also realize like we are now living in a day and age where a lot of people are sitting in different spaces, right? You have a lot of people today who are like, you're on this side of the internet and the next person's on the other side of the internet, and, because there is so much Christian leadership and, people are looking for a community, you fail to kind of realize that this person is human, right? So we go into these communities and we listen to these podcasts and we put so much into what they're saying, failing to realize like this person is genuinely just human like you. They have flaws, they have insecurities. Like you have to be very careful of that type of stuff. A lot of these men, they may be faithful to their wives, but they really do derive a sense of validation from, being in like women's ministries and being, the talking head to talk to women and encourage women and being like the brother figure or the father figure who doesn't disrespect women. And, especially when we start talking about things like the African American, like there's a lot of layers there. And I think if you can, weed out some of that, or rather discern some of that, I think you can find like the truth within yourself and the truth, maybe what God is really trying to say to you. But I think if you're listening to multiple different ministries, everybody's got issues. Like, I just think that changes things. And then the other thing too, I think what's really unfortunate is like when you brand yourself as a Christian, when you decide that like, okay, my faith is going to be my platform. That's how I'm going to show up in the social media streets. That's how I'm going to show up in the world. It's not about hiding or anything like that. Like me personally, it's just an intimate relationship for me. It's different for me. I'm all about the values, right? I don't have to, me personally, I don't necessarily feel like God is calling me to brand myself as a Christian and do do ministry on the front lines. Like, I think it's just about like being a loving person and showing up in the world. But again, my philosophies are my philosophies. It's honestly something I don't even care to share because I don't really care to be understood by y'all, in terms of like my faith. Of course, I'm not talking about like my listeners. I'm saying like, sometimes people feel like they have to, I think some of this is sort of like people feeling like they have to explain their faith, or feeling like they have to, justify that or do it because they feel like that's what God is calling them to do. When it's like, I think we just kind of forget the act of being a loving person, and I think we forget the act of like actually being a doer of the word and like really what it means to be a person of faith. What does that look like? Like, I think today you just have too many people who are just playing a part and talking and, but they're not really living it. And they're not really living in their truth and being who God created them to be. And they're not being honest. I think when you say things like dying of yourself and you say things like, the will of God, that's such a big, grand, like that, how big that is. That's a generalization like that. Nobody knows what that means. So you have a lot of people who are just doing things to try to find it. And oftentimes they find themselves following the way of religion and what everybody else is doing, right? Like, and so that leads you down the path of like choosing the wrong partners, that leads you down a path of not living your life, not really developing a deeper relationship with God. Like, the process of sanctification and crucifixion, that's a lifelong thing. Like, you're going to be 80 sitting at home reading the Bible, starting your podcast. Like, like it's a process, but I just think if you are somebody who is just not living in alignment with like who God created you to be, and you're not authentic, I don't think you're ever really going to find that. I don't think you're ever really going to find your person or find something that's in alignment with your values. You know what I mean? Like, you have to, I don't know, y'all. I think I'm all for it, but I think you have to start asking yourself, like, how much of this is authentic to me? How much of this is real to me? Because that's what's going to make the difference. Peace. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say that's what's going to make the difference in all of your relationships. Peace.